I yield to the gentleman. I yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding to me. The gentleman articulates a number of premises that I reject, I don't agree with. Nobody's putting anything on the back of the troops. And the gentleman has been in this body for some period of time. And he knows that from time to time, the other body adds amendments to bills. And it is incumbent upon us to consider those amendments. As the gentleman knows, when we passed the bill through the House, it did not have the IMF funding in the bill. The Senate added to the bill. It was a subject of the conference report. The President of the United States has asked for the IMF funding. We happen to agree with the President of the United States that the IMF funding is appropriate funding and does, in fact, as I will restate for the gentleman, we believe add a security component to the troop funding that is the primary purpose of this bill. Secondly, I reject your premise that somehow this money is going to go to people who are going to harm us. In fact, of course, as I told you last week, the last time Iran, which you mentioned, received money was when Ronald Reagan was President of the United States in 1984. There's no expectation, in my opinion, that Iran, while it may be eligible technically, is going to get any money, as it has not for the last quarter of a century. I would reiterate what I said last week in quoting Ronald Reagan. No individual who wanted to give aid and comfort to the enemy. Very forthright in his confrontation of communism and despotism. He said, I have an unbreakable commitment to increased funding for the IMF. As I cited to you, he said that on September 27, 1983. He went on to say the IMF is the linchpin of the international financial system. The gentleman on his side of the aisle continue, in my opinion, to misrepresent what is intended by that funding. The President of the United States, whether it was Ronald Reagan, George Bush I, George Bush II, or any other president that goes to an international meeting with 19 of the other large industrial nations of the world, and they sit down together in an attempt to try to bring the global economy back to vibrancy, and agree that in part what is needed is some assistance to the poorest nations in this world who are themselves being dragged down and in the process adversely affecting the global markets generally, agree to make a substantial commitment of loan guarantees available. As the gentleman knows, the United States has about a 20% vote on this, and this is about a 20% contribution the President agreed to. The other 19 nations agreed to come up with 80% of these dollars. All of them agreed that this is in the best interest of restoring our global economy, and I suggest to you as well, stabilizing the security situation that confronts the international community. President Bush, and this is the last quote I'll give, you may be tired of hearing these quotes, but your side of the aisle has been making a great hue and cry as if IMF is some specious, dangerous pursuit. This is not a bailout. This is an assistance to people to try to grow back and be positive, contributing members of the international global marketplace. George Bush said this, the IMF and the World Bank, given their central role in the world economy, are key to helping all of us through this situation by providing a combination of policy advice and financial assistance. George Bush said that on September 25, 1990, a time of economic stress internationally, for the same reason that President Obama and the 19 other industrialized nations of the world agreed that this was an appropriate step to take. I would hope the gentleman would urge his party to support this, consistent with the principles of Ronald Reagan and George Bush. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. And, Madam Speaker, I think, as the gentleman knows, we're probably going to have to leave this topic and just agree to disagree. It is very concerning, given the new times that we are in. And, frankly, the facts and information has come forward about the special drawing rights, about the fact and knowledge that we have at this point, knowing U.S. taxpayer dollars will help facilitate countries like Iran, Venezuela, Burma, and others to access more money to do what it is that they think is in their interest, and certainly not in the interest of the U.S. But But I would like to turn the gentleman's attention back to his statement about the intention of this bill and the primary purpose of the war funding bill, which, again, to loosely paraphrase, was to provide for troop safety and security, and that's the underlying purpose. And the gentleman indicated that the President has already taken the same position that most of us, I believe, in this House have taken so far as these photos are concerned and the release of the photos of the detainees. And so I'm, again, at somewhat of a loss to understand why it is that even if the White House and the President himself has sided with what I think the majority of the American people feel, as well as the members of this House, why it is that we're doing the opposite in the text of the report that we will be voting on. And I would say to the gentleman, Commander Ray Odierno, the General Odierno, commander of the multinational forces in Iraq, someone that I'm sure the gentleman has had the occasion to meet, and I as well, who we know is a very respected and serious leader of our troops. He said just a few weeks ago, I strongly believe the release of these photos will endanger the lives of U.S. soldiers, airmen, Marines, sailors, and civilians, as well as the lives of our Iraqi partners. Certain operating units are at particular risk of harm from release of the photos. And he went on to describe those particular risks that are specific. The gentleman, I think, can agree with me. It is not in the interest of securing the safety of our troops for us to remain silent or for us not to take congressional action ensuring that nothing occurs for us to possibly harm our troops in this bill. That is why I ask the gentleman again, how have we sat here and delayed consideration of the bill because now we had to ensure inclusion in the bill, the stripping of the provision which provides the safety of our troops? And I yield to the gentleman.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Maybe one of the answers is we have less enthusiasm on this side of the aisle for interposing in cases that the court is considering. I was called back on a Sunday by your side of the aisle many years ago to do exactly that. It ended up having no effect. There are a lot of people on my side of the aisle who believe that the objective that is being sought, which the President of the United States, and to this extent General Odierno agrees with the Commander-in-Chief, that these photos ought not to be released. As I pointed out to you in the paragraph that I read from the President's letter, in fact, the court has stayed the release of those pending a review by the Supreme Court of the United States. This matter is under consideration. There was general concern about obviating FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, generally as opposed to specifically, but the President has made it very clear, Commander-in-Chief, and obviously General Odierno agrees with the Commander-in-Chief on this issue, that he is going to take such steps as are necessary to ensure that these photos are not released, to the extent that he and General Odierno both agree that the release of those pictures may in fact have an adverse consequence on the safety of our troops. So that what I simply respond to the gentleman is that the President of the United States and General Odierno are both in agreement and are taking actions. The President of the United States is taking action to affect that agreement.
I thank the gentleman, Madam Speaker. I would simply point to the vote taken yesterday in the House on the motion to instruct conferees. 267 members of this House support the inclusion of the language barring release of the photos. So I am at a loss to understand the thinking behind this action when we bring this report to the floor that strips that language. Not only the majority, by far, of the members of this House on both sides of the aisle said that they think that language is important. The American people do. It is counterintuitive to think at all that Congress should not take action to secure the safety of our troops and stop the release of those photos. Lastly, Madam Speaker, I would just say to the gentleman, we have been somewhat dismayed, again, about the clouding of the issues and the underlying principle of this bill, which is to fund our troops and provide for their safety. and we've seen this process delayed over unrelated items, and it is unfortunate, and I'm hopeful that our troops are not getting the wrong message, that somehow their safety, security, and the funding of their efforts doesn't come first. And I would just lastly like to ask the gentleman, how is it that when we left the House and we had the broad bipartisan support of the provisions which fenced off the money so that we would not endanger the citizens and the communities of the targeted facilities that the detainees from Guantanamo would come to, how is it that we took that fencing off of the money to preclude the funding of shipping terrorists here to now say that we're going to be safer? It is a better policy for us to try and achieve the rights and protect the rights of the terrorists at the potential expense of endangering U.S. citizens. And I yield.
Gentleman yield?
I yield.
As the gentleman knows, there's no money in here for transferring the $80 million that was requested. Was not included in the House, was not included in the Senate. It's still not included. The bill prohibits current detainees from being released in the continental United States and Alaska, Hawaii, and D.C., as the gentleman knows. Prohibits current detainees from being transferred to the continental United States, Alaska, Hawaii, or D.C., except to be prosecuted only after Congress receives a plan detailing risks involved and a plan for mitigating such risk, cost of transfer, legal rationale, and court demands, and a copy of the notification provided to the governor of receiving state 14 days before transfer with certification by the Attorney General that the individual poses little or no security risk. In addition, the bill provides current detainees cannot be transferred or released to another country unless the President submits to Congress 15 days prior to such transfer the name of the individual and the country the individual will be transferred to, and an assessment of risk posed and actions taken to mitigate such risk, and the terms of the transfer agreement with the other country, including any financial assistance. Lastly, it requires the President to submit a report to Congress describing the disposition of each current detainee before the facility can be closed. But let me say, in the final analysis, many Republicans, including the former Secretary of State, Colin Powell, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, advisor to a number of Republican presidents, said on a news program almost a year ago now that he believed that Guantanamo ought to be closed. He believed it should have been closed yesterday when he was speaking. That was a year ago. The President of the United States has indicated he thinks Guantanamo ought to be closed. There is disagreement on that, I understand that. But if it's going to be closed, a plan has to be effected for the purpose of dealing with those who are at Guantanamo. And the President is working on such a plan. The Congress in both bodies made a determination until we have such a plan. We're not going to take action to facilitate that. That's what I think the conference agreement sets forth, and I think it sets forth the protections that can give the American people a confidence level. Let me say something additional to the gentleman. I'm older than the gentleman. When I was a child, approximately 4 or 5 years of age, I was living in Mexia, Texas, M-E-X-I-A, Texas. My father, born in Denmark, served in the U.S. Army. He was in his 40s and wasn't sent overseas. He was the finance officer at a POW camp in Mexia, Texas. Mexia, Texas is a town of about 7,500 people. Apparently, then and now, I asked somebody about it just recently, there were 4,000 Nazi troops in a POW camp in Mexia, Texas. They were kept there. They were not necessarily terrorists. We need to take special precautions. But in the pursuance of the policies enunciated by the President of the United States when he ran for office, when he was substantially elected by the American people, he told them exactly what he thought ought to be done. He is pursuing what he said to the American people he would do. He is doing, in my opinion, in a thoughtful way that will protect the American public and will bring to justice those who have committed international crimes. I think that is something that we are trying to work through. I want to reiterate, the gentleman has now mentioned so many times that we've allowed the funding of the troops to get caught up with other issues. Surely the gentleman, I know, does not mean, because he's been here long enough to know that when the House and the Senate and the presidency were in the hands of his party, the funding of the troops got tied up from time to time with other issues. That's the nature of the legislative process. But I'm hopeful that the gentleman, because he's so focused on getting this money to the troops quickly, I'm hopeful that the gentleman will urge all of his colleagues on Tuesday to join with us in voting to fund the troops. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman and his plea for support in his bill, knowing good and well that this bill did not go out of this House without some support from Republicans that were necessary for its passage in its original form. I would just say to the gentleman and thank him for his description of the POW camp in Texas, but here we are dealing with individuals who are not necessarily soldiers of war. They're enemy combatants. An entirely different set of circumstances that we have today. And I would say that if it is satisfactory to the gentleman that we
yield on that question.
I'll yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. He and I are probably two of the strongest supporters in this body. Those POWs were part of a regime that killed 6 million people. I remind the gentleman doesn't need reminding of that, but these were not simply soldiers of a regime that was pursuing
reclaiming my time,
a war that you and I might view in a different way.
Reclaiming my time, I would just say to the gentleman, as he does know, there were applicable provisions at law which govern the treatment of soldiers at war, and there is a much less definitive, more nebulous environment in which we are to look towards enemy combatants, which is my point. Because with the trial of enemy combatants on U.S. soil, we are confronting, as the gentleman knows, cases of first impression at every turn. We are confronting uncertainty as to the disposition of these cases, which brings up potential harm for U.S. citizens. And I just go back to the gentleman's plea that he would like to see us support this bill. If the primary purpose is to maintain, promote the security and safety of our troops and provide them with funding, it is a reach for me to understand how allowing for release of photos, how allowing for the transfer of enemy combatants, terrorists, to U.S. soil furthers that end. So I would say, in closing, Madam Speaker, if the gentleman is satisfied with deferring to the White House and deferring to this President on the very core purpose of securing this country at all levels, and doesn't feel that Congress should take affirmative action, then I believe his support of this bill is well put. Well, but it is certainly the opinion of many of us in this House, as indicated by votes as late as yesterday, that we can do better, that we can take action to secure our troops, get them the money they need, and get rid of the unrelated items in this bill. And I yield back. I yield to the gentleman.
I just simply want to observe, as I pointed out in the 5 or 6 points I made, particularly that current detainees cannot be transferred or released to another country without notice to us, nor can they be released here in the United States without further action. So that the gentleman's premise is, I think, not correct, that we're going to, this President has the authority to or the intent to release people at this time in the United States before or after trial. Now, having said that, I would say the gentleman continues to talk about the add-ons, but I will tell the gentleman, as the gentleman knows, over 80% of this bill deals with the funding and security of our troops and the prosecution of the effort to defeat terrorism. Over 80% of this bill. It is in that context that I would hope the gentleman would see his way clear to urging his colleagues to join with us in passing this needed legislation. I yield back.
Madam Speaker, I thank the gentleman very much for his suggestion in council, and I yield back. Speaker?
For what purpose is the gentleman from Maryland rise?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that when the House adjourns today, it adjourn to meet at 12:30 p.m. on Monday next for morning hour debate. And further, Madam Speaker, when the House adjourns on that day, it adjourned to meet at 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, June 16, 2009, for a morning hour debate.
Without objection,